Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for adramofOutlander.com for all things Outlander, from the Diana Gabaldon book series to the Stars TV series and everything in between. This is episode 59, week 17 of the Voyager read-along. Hello! It is so good to be back with you again this week. We are a bit more than halfway through, and we're going to be plodding on until February. It's pretty quiet in Outlander world this past week, so we're just going to dive right in to chapter 46. We meet a porpoise. This chapter opens with Claire waiting for Marsali to speak to her. She thinks there's something on her mind, but the first move must be the young woman's. Finally, a month after leaving Scotland, she finally speaks up to Claire. Claire is in their shared cabin writing surgical notes from a minor amputation she performed when Marsali appears in the doorway. She begins to speak, saying she has a question, that she doesn't like Claire, but Jamie tells her she is a wise woman and maybe an honest woman, and even if she is a whore, maybe she'll tell her. Way to butter her up, Marsali! Seriously, this girl has ovaries of steel to speak to Claire that way. I know she has to be feisty to live with her mother, but still, sheesh, girl. On the upside, though, one would always know where they stand with Marsali. Now, mind you, Claire is 50 years old. Marsali is 15 years old. So the way she's speaking to somebody of that age is quite disrespectful. So Claire sits quietly, not making any of the responses swirling around in her head. That was a good move, Claire. And she says, maybe I will. What is it you need to know? Marsali, seeing it is safe to sit down, gets on with it. Says it's to do with bairns and how you get them. Your mother didn't tell you where babies come from? This is so funny and blunt. Of course I ken where they come from. Any fool knows that much. You let a man put his prick between your legs and there's the devil to pay 9 months later. What I want to know is how you don't get them. Claire asks for clarification that Marsali doesn't want a child when she's properly married like most young women. Maybe she does at some point, but for now she can't. Claire asks why not. I like that Claire is treating her like a patient, not the daughter of Leary Mackenzie. So she's giving her the space that any patient who was speaking rudely to her would get. She says it's because of Fergus. They've barely been able to kiss now and again because of Jamie's notions. Amen, Claire agrees wryly. And she wants to know what that has to do with not wanting babies. Marsali wants to like sex. And Claire says, I imagine that has something to do with Fergus, but I'm afraid I don't quite see what it has to do with babies. The Scots do have a way of taking time to get to the heart of things. I feel a story coming on. Marsali says Fergus likes Claire. She says she's fond of him too and has known him since he was a boy. Marsali asks if Claire knows where Fergus was born. Claire says the brothel and such. Fergus told Marsali last Hogmanay, a long time ago, in a 15-year-old's mind. That's when Marsali declared her love for him and he to her, but her mother would never agree to the match. Fergus explained being born in a brothel and being a pickpocket until he met Jamie. She thinks Fergus was sure it would scare Marsali away when she knew the truth, but she made sure it didn't scare her away at all. And she's not worried about Fergus. He says he knows what to do and that she'll like it fine once they're past the first time or two having sex. But her concern is that her mother told her differently. What did she tell you? Claire is fascinated. Can you imagine being in this room and what Claire is thinking? She's going to be getting some insight on what's going on, and perhaps this will reinforce the things that Jamie told her about Leary and when he and she were married. Marsali tells Claire it's not so much what her mother said, except that Fergus would do terrible things to her having lived with whores and a mother that was one too. But it was more how she acted about sex. When Marsali had her first menstrual cycle, her mother told her what to do and about the curse of Eve and that she must just put up with it. Then her mother read from the Bible to Marsali about it saying how women were filthy sinners because of Eve and they could be saved through the suffering and bearing of children. Claire remarks how she feels about St. Paul. Marsali is shocked because he's in the Bible. Then Claire reminds Marsali of some other of God's men in the Bible and what terrible things they did. Marsali continues after being stunned by Claire's words, that her mother said she was near ready to wed, and she must do her duty as a wife to do as her husband wanted whether she liked it or not. Marsali remembers her mother looking sad when she said it. Marsali thought a woman's duty must be awful and thought on what Paul said about suffering and bearing children. Claire sat and listened. Imagine her conflicting emotions learning such intimate things about Laoghaire. And this echoes what Jamie had said to Claire about Laoghaire's dislike of sex. Marsali went on with difficulty. She doesn't remember her father, who was taken by the English when she was 3. But she was old enough when her mother and Jamie wed to see how it was between them. Claire sees her discomfort calling Jamie by his name instead of Da. I like how Claire, when she has the time to sit with something, how reasonable she is. And that she can sit with this information coming to her and be kind. She's not catty. She's not rude. She's simply listening, and she's compassionate toward Marsali. Marsali sees Jamie as kind as he always was to her and Joan, but her mother would shrink away from him when he reached to pull her near, and she bites her lip more. I could see she was afraid. She didn't like him to touch her, but I couldn't see that he ever did anything to be afraid of, not where we could see, so I thought it must be something that he did when they were in their bed alone. Joan and I used to wonder what it could be. Mam never had marks on her face or arms, and she didn't limp when she walked, not like Magdalene Wallace, whose husband always beat her when he was drunk on market day. So we didn't think Da hit her. Think of that. Think of Claire hearing this from the mouth of a 15-year-old. That is a loaded bit of insight from her. Again, it reflects back what Jamie had disclosed to Claire about his intimate life with Laoghaire, that she and Joan were smart and observant girls, and that someone had hurt Laoghaire sexually in the past, or maybe as a part of sex, or it's what she'd been told. And there was this harsh acceptance that some men beat their wives. She wasn't questioning that it happened. They were trying to question if it was happening. That's really heartbreaking to me. Anyone feeling for Laoghaire just a little bit? I do. I don't forgive her behaviors, her manipulation, but no one deserves to be hurt as she was. And clearly something happened to Laoghaire. It's not just immaturity. Can you imagine being somebody like Jamie who takes utter joy in sex? It's a whole person experience. He loves that intimacy and that connection and the bonding and the freedom. And to have your partner pull away from you and shrink away and not like it and not tell you why. Ugh. Claire gives Marsali water. From her home experiences, Marsali deduced that the issue her mother had with sex must have to do with having children, and that is why she didn't want to go to bed with Jamie out of fear for more. I mean, I can see why she came to that conclusion, based on what she knows and what she saw. Then she looks directly at Claire in a challenging manner. Again, this girl has some clanging ovaries on her. Then she says, I saw you with my Da, just the minute before he saw me. I think you liked what he was doing to you in bed. Claire opened and closed her mouth. Picture that, and to have this 15-year-old recount it back to you. I mean, Jamie's face was in between Claire's thighs. That was quite an education in that split second. And Claire says, well, yes, I did. And you like it when he touches you? I've seen it. Well then, you haven't got any children, and I heard there are ways not to have them, only nobody seems to know just how, but you must being a wise woman and all. I'd like a babe, but if it's got to be a babe or liking Fergus, then it's Fergus. So it won't be a babe if you'll tell me how. And Claire explains that she has had children. Surprised, wide eyes look back at Claire over this revelation. She asks if Jamie knows. Well, of course he knows. They were his. She never heard of Jamie having any bairns. And Claire says he probably thought it was none of her business. And it's not, either. She tells her the first baby died while they were in France. Their second daughter is grown and on her own. She was born after Culloden. So he's never seen her, the grown one? Marsali asks, frowning. Claire now needs a sip of water before answering. My, how personal this conversation has gotten. Marsali is getting to see Claire as something and someone different. She can't just be the whore that took Jamie from her mother. Her mother never had Jamie. Not in the mind, body, spirit sense. She had his name and his protection. But now she gets to see Claire as a woman. She's a mother. She's a wife. Marsali says it's very sad and goes back to thinking and trying to work it all out. Is her theory busted? So Claire's had children and it didn't make a difference with her liking sex or not. Then Marsali asks if Claire had any other men while she was living in France. That is definitely none of your business, Claire says. She also says for some women, childbirth can affect if they like sex or not, but not all. And there are good reasons not to have a baby right away anyway, going into a marriage. I like how Claire steers this conversation back to the clinical. Claire tells her there are lots of ways to prevent pregnancy, but many don't work well. And then she's fondly thinking about the pill and its effectiveness back in the 1960s. Now, what she's using is the sage femme advice from the French midwives and her own knowledge of herbs. Claire is well on her way to clinical mode when Marsali asks if she misses her daughter. This causes Claire to think her chances of ever seeing Brianna again were about the same as Leary ever seeing Marsali again. It is not a good thought. I feel for Leary. Her daughter is going a world away from her. And even in today's ease of travel, if somebody moves out of the country, you may not see them again. For financial reasons, work reasons, all sorts of reasons. It just might not be feasible to get back. How many people have come to the U.S. from other countries and they never see loved ones again? And that's today, not when travel was completely challenging. I do feel for Leary as a mother. She might be a terrible wife to some, but she loves her daughters more than anything. Searching through her box, Claire comes up with a cleaned natural sponge. She cuts it into 3-inch pieces to use as a barrier method after it's soaked in tansy oil or vinegar. Even wine can be used as a spermicide. She explains to put it in before going to bed with the man even the first time, and as Marsali is about to ask more questions, they were interrupted by shouts above on deck. Claire says they will talk about it more later. So what do you think about that exchange between Marsali and Claire? I think this is the beginning of a really rewarding relationship, and that Claire will get to do some of the mothering that Marsali still needs. We all need a mama. And Claire, I believe, will be very careful about ever stepping on toes. But she will be there and be open and honest and loving to Marsali. So back on deck, Claire finds Jamie standing with the captain. There's a large ship approaching them, and Jamie believes they mean to board the Artemis. It is a British man-of-war ship. Bad news for the Artemis, who was sailing under a French flag in a much smaller vessel. It looks like the British ship might be in need of deckhands, and they can put anyone into service who appears to be British. Jamie wants Claire to go below. She wants to know what will happen to the men if they are pressed into service. They will have to serve upon that ship. It's called the Porpoise, and the men would be released of service when they reach their port, or not. Lovely. So any British citizen can be commandeered to work in the Royal Navy. And they start talking about who might be taken, who not. So Fergus and Innes wouldn't be taken because of their lack of limb, right? And then Jamie gives directions to Claire where to meet him in Jamaica if he is put into service by the Royal Navy. Claire wants him to pretend to be French, but he will not have his men taken while he stays aboard the Artemis. And he says to her they need to go by the name Malcolm to be safer. So the Artemis is being boarded, and a man appears seeking out the captain introducing himself as acting Captain Thomas Leonard of His Majesty's ship Porpoise. "Have you a surgeon aboard?" He explains that they had an outbreak of some sort of plague 4 weeks prior and half the crew are ill. 30 lost so far. The captain died. This acting captain, a young man, was third lieutenant who came to command after those above him in rank, died too. He again asks for somebody with medical experience. And Claire can't keep her mouth shut when she really ought to. And she says she's the ship's surgeon. And she asks what the symptoms are. The young captain is flabbergasted at this. And Jamie says, "My wife's a rare healer. If it's help you came for, I'd advise you to answer her questions and do as she tells you." The captain begins to describe the symptoms. He's apologetic for his description of one of the symptoms. Poor kid. Claire interrupts his apology, thinking she knows what the illness is. She's excited. She feels a diagnosis under her hands, and she knows what to do. And she thinks the call of the trumpets to a war horse. Then it gets dicey here. She says she needs to see them to be sure of a diagnosis. Jamie chimes in, saying she can advise him from here but cannot go aboard the Porpoise. The captain pleads. Jamie says no, and Claire says yes. He then grabs Claire to speak privately with her. He thinks her going onto a plague ship would be taking a great risk for not only herself but the crew and in finding young Ian, just for the sake of a pack of English. She explains she cannot get what she thinks it is because she's been vaccinated. Given this reassurance, Jamie is softening toward her wanting to go. She goes on to explain as a doctor, when people are sick, she has to treat them, and that's it. Jamie wants to hear more from her. She thinks Frank at least understood her compulsion, her need to heal. She tells him of the oath she took when she became a physician. He wants to know what sort of oath. This is really speaking his language now. This is something he understands. Germs and vaccinations are not in his wheelhouse. He simply believes her on it. This he gets. She says the oath from memory, even though she'd only said it once before. Frank had given her a copy as a gift for her wall. The oath she took is this: "I swear by Apollo the physician, Aesculapius, Hygeia, and Panacea, and I take to witness all the gods, all the goddesses, to keep according to my ability and my judgment the following oath. I will prescribe regimen for the good of my patients according to my ability and my judgment, and never do harm to anyone. To please no one will I prescribe a deadly drug, nor give advice which may cause his death, but I will preserve the purity of my life and my art. In every house where I come, I will enter only for the good of my patients, keeping myself far from all intentional ill-doing and all seduction, and especially from the pleasures of love with women or with men, be they free or slaves. All that may come to my knowledge in the exercise of my profession, or outside of my profession, or in daily commerce with men, which ought not to be spread abroad, I will keep secret and will never reveal. If I keep this oath faithfully, may enjoy my life and practice my art, respected by all men and in all times. But if I swerve from it or violate it, may the reverse be my lot." Jamie likes it, though some of it was pagan, and he likes that she's not supposed to seduce anyone under her care. Is that how it's done, then, in the company of physicians? You hold yourself bound to help whoever calls for it, even an enemy? Claire says it doesn't matter when someone is ill or hurt. "I will. I've taken an oath now and then myself, and none of them lightly." He touches her silver ring, some way heavier than others, though. He was holding her hand, and he was very close to her. She agrees some oaths are heavier, but where one vow can be kept without damage to another. He sighs, then kisses her gently. He wants to go with her aboard the other ship, but he cannot because typhoid is highly contagious. And she says there's only one way to know for sure what the illness is. And the next thing we know, Claire is heading over to the Porpoise by means of a scary bosun's chair. And when she gets on deck, she immediately asks to see the sick men. And we get this awful description of the 'tween decks, of the hammocks, of the wretched stench. And she says it's worse than unwashed semen was the reek of vomitus and ripe, throat-clogging smell of blood-streaked diarrhea. It was liberally spattered on the decking beneath the hammocks. Her shoes suctioned to the floor. I can only imagine to have dozens of men ill with this, how bad it would be. Claire asks for light and begins examining one of the men. She goes through other possible diagnoses, but typhus seems the most likely. Without a microscope and a blood culture, she was as sure as she could be. So she tells the captain what she believes it is. He asks if she knows how to treat it. She says she does, but it won't be easy. So if you want to find out many things about typhoid, listen to the Outlander Science Club selection this week by Karen Doherty. Claire goes into what needs to be done first. The sick men have to be moved to an area where they can have fresh air. She needs lots of boiled water. They need to be sponged to bring down the fevers. They need a liquid diet and not infecting more of the crew. She's in full clinical Claire mode for the greater good at this point. The captain says to get it done, that she can order his men at will to get whatever she needs. I can make a start and tell you how to be going on, but it's going to be a big job. Captain Rains and my husband will be anxious to be on our way. He explains they must get to Jamaica urgently and his crew cannot get sicker. She starts the process of containment and nursing the sick. She goes to the rail to tell Jamie it will be 2 more hours. He is not happy. So she's had the sick men moved to the afterdeck, and then they are stripped of filthy clothing, and they are hosed off with seawater and sponged. She instructs the galley how to properly handle food, and when she's there, she feels movement under her feet. And the cook reacted by covering pots and such, and she had seen Murphy do this when they were casting off. They were underway. She runs onto the deck, only to see the Artemis getting smaller. And she yells at the captain, "What are you doing, you bloody little bastard? What's going on here?" "Speak your mind, Claire." He says they must get to Jamaica with utmost dispatch. He is sorry and indeed regrets the necessity. "But nothing. Put about. Heave to. Drop the bloody anchor. You can't take me away like this." I love her rant. She is pissed. No other word for it. He says he requires her service and has let her husband know that she will be taken care of until the Artemis reaches Jamaica. Claire is in a fit of anger. She wants to know if her husband permitted him to abduct her. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. He was most intransigent, I'm afraid. You think? I can imagine what Jamie did. She says she won't help him, and then he shows his hand. Says he could have pressed half of the Artemis's crew into service, but didn't. He agreed to leave them unmolested in return for the gift of her medical knowledge. "So you've decided to press me instead, and my husband agreed to this bargain?" No, Jamie didn't, but the captain of the Artemis did see the force of the argument. Claire stops and looks at the captain. She describes his state. He's slovenly, he has swollen, tired eyes, but somehow is still dignified. He says he is desperate and she is his only chance and he has to take it. She didn't respond. She felt sympathy for his position regardless of her anger and thinking about Jamie. She knew he could lose much of his crew without her help, and even with her help, there was potential for great losses. She pulls herself together, and without anything else to do, she gets to work. It's not like she really has a choice anyway. What a pickle to be in! His position is understandable. As a doctor, she needs to and must help, and she feels terrible knowing Jamie is falling further away as the ship takes up speed. Claire goes full force into doctor mode. She has a job to do, and she's organizing everything in her mind. She first asks the captain for alcohol and needs to see the purser. So she and the captain need to go below decks, but since she's in skirts, well, she has to go first in case he sees something naughty. And as she gets to the bottom of the ladder, she hears shouting above. Someone named Tompkins says that he recognized the big red-haired man on the Artemis. The captain says he will deal with it later. There is no time for it now. And when she heard something, Claire scurried back up part way to listen to the conversation. And then the captain suddenly starts descending, and he gives her a look, but she asks about the food stores. The ill men will need to be fed carefully. And he says they have milk goats. The gunner's wife tends to them. She meets the purser, Mr. Overholt. He's a short, plump, and bald man. Claire is agitated overhearing someone recognizing Jamie. Who was Tompkins? What would the captain do with the information? She couldn't do anything about it just now, and she had to figure out what supplies were available for her use in the sick room feeding. She decides at first boiled milk and water only, then maybe soup once recovery is occurring. And she asks the purser if he might have something more suitable, and learns of a list of ingredients that are for their special passenger. The new governor of Jamaica is on board, hence the haste in getting to Jamaica. She doesn't care and says if he isn't sick, he can eat salt beef, and the wine needs to go to the galley. Yeah, she's good at commandeering supplies and speaking up for sick patients. And I love the wording here. She ruthlessly obtained supplies. I can see her getting taken through the ship and confiscating whatever she wants for medical use. The crew is told they must give in to her wishes no matter how unreasonable they seem under order of the captain. She almost has ultimate power. I can see all those men not being too happy about being ordered around. She has a quarantine plan, clean the 'tween decks, rehang the hammocks further apart, then the sick could be brought back down. The healthy men will sleep on deck and be provided with adequate toilet facilities. She's list-making in her head while trying to figure out where the outbreak started. Normally, typhus spreads by ingestion of the bacteria carried on hands by contaminated feces or urine. And so I just want to say, wash your damned hands, people. But people didn't know about germs. They didn't know exactly how things spread, so they didn't wash their hands. So somebody would go to the bathroom and then go into food preparation and never think a thing of it. She thinks it would have to be one of the food handlers, and Claire is figuring out her course of action to narrow down the suspects. Even in some of our biggest food recalls that we've had in recent years, they're from somebody who used facilities and then didn't properly wash, and then were handling the food, say spinach, and it gets into our country's food supply. One person. So please, please, thoroughly wash your hands. Even if you don't have soap or hot water. Friction under the water really, really helps. And she has been given a helper. His name is Elias Pound. He's a young man of 17 or 18. She knows what's ahead for them. And if he was to work closely with her, they would need to be on comfortable terms. She wants to call him by his first name and be more familiar, but that's not really the naval way. So Claire says only in private will she call him his name. She also knows she can train a couple of more to do the work when she needs to rest. So it's all coming into focus for Claire. And to get to know him a little better, she asks Elias how long he's been at sea. Since he was 7. 7. That's a first or second grade child. His uncle is on a ship and was able to get him a berth. And he joined the Porpoise for only this voyage. He gives her the chest from the prior surgeon, Mr. Hunter, and asks if she can use it. Claire says she'll look at the contents later. And then she enlists Elias in talking to the ship's cook. Claire is firmly in her work element. She's thinking of multiple things at once, how to combat the disease. Since her arrival, a few have already died, and about 45 more had varying chances of survival. She thinks many of the crew are likely incubating the disease yet to become ill, but certainly would. She requires a substantial amount of boiled water, both sea and fresh, for different purposes, and she needs milk. She would interview the galley hands to find the source of infection and isolate it if possible. All the alcohol that could be spared was being gathered in the sick bay, and she's wondering if it could be distilled, because pure alcohol is better for disinfection. The hammocks were being boiled and dried before the healthy men could sleep in them. Elias could help with that. Necessities were at the forefront of her thoughts. In the back was the name Tompkins and his unknown information. And for a moment she stands by the railing, trying to clear her mind, get some fresh air. But the smell from below reminded her that even though the 'tween decks could be cleaned, they would not be fresh. There's not enough air down there. She thinks of the Artemis and Jamie, but pushes it out of her head quickly. There was no room for panic or loneliness. And she knew she needed to speak to the captain soon, but right now she had more important things to do. Claire is ordering everything, and she's seeing the process unfold in her head. She's seeing what's most important, all the steps that have to be taken, and she goes for it. She has a wondrous mind. She calls for Elias to take her to the goats. It's in Claire's best interest to stay busy, to stay in doctor mode. Emotionally, she cannot afford to linger on Jamie. She does have another mission, though, to find out what Tompkins knows and what the captain knows. I always wonder, at this point, what the heck is Jamie going through, knowing that Claire is far in front of them on another ship, dealing with an incredibly infectious disease, and he can't do anything about it. I love to see Claire in her element. She seems so natural. She seems free there. It makes sense, and she makes it work. And even though she's not fearless, she appears to be so. And now we go into Chapter 47, Plague Ship. Over the next 2 days, Claire hadn't been able to speak with the captain because she'd been so busy. The purser was even avoiding her in her demands. He locked himself in his quarters with sage and hyssop around his neck to ward off the plague. Initially, the crew that was assigned to her to help her clean was very slow. Through all sorts of different means, including stamping her feet, whining, and yelling, they became more expedient under her command. She says she was hoarse and she had to herd them like a sheepdog. So even though Claire doesn't have nature around her, she creates it in her thoughts about being a sheepdog, and we have the goats that we're going to meet. She hadn't yet found the source of the contagion, but the death count was slowing and there were less daily cases. Morale was improving with hopefulness, and she was thinking within a week she could halt the devastation if she could find the source. And then she found 2 crewmen who had prior been arrested for brewing illicit liquor, and she was able to put them to work distilling half the ship's rum into pure alcohol. Smart Claire. She had to find those guys. So with this pure alcohol, what was she doing with it? Anyone going in or out of the galley or sick bay had to dip their hands in the pure alcohol, and the men, ensuring cleanliness, had a rifle to make certain no one drank the used dirty alcohol. I can imagine them being confused and annoyed at having dipped their hands in this pure alcohol. I think about how drying that would be. But they have no idea why she's having them do that. What does this have to do with being clean? Well, good job, Claire. Mrs. Johansson, the gunner's wife, was a good ally to Claire, even with her few words of English. She still did what Claire asked of her, and quickly and well. Claire considered her her left hand and Elias her right. She was charged with scalding the goat's milk, prepping the hard biscuits, including knocking out the weevils, and soaking them in the milk, then feeding the mixture to those who were healthy enough for it. Her husband had become ill but seemed very hearty and likely to fully recover. Claire is told that somebody was drinking the pure alcohol again. Claire curses, and Elias becomes wide-eyed. She apologizes for offending his tender ears. He says he's heard it before, just not from a lady like. I'm not a lady, Elias. I'm a doctor. I know she's often profane, but in this circumstance, I expect her to have even less of a filter for language. She sends him to look for the unconscious drunk sailor. She complained to the purser about the problem. He said the crew would even make their own fermented drinks in their boots sometimes. They wouldn't stop drinking the purified alcohol, even being told it could kill them. Yeah, and kill them it did. One was already dead from it. 2 were in a coma, likely with permanent brain damage if they woke up at all. And then she says, not that being in a bloody floating hellhole like this isn't likely to brain damage anyone. As if it isn't enough, trying to save half the miserable lot from typhoid, now the other half is trying to kill themselves with my alcohol. Damn the bloody lot of them. Exasperated doctor is exasperated. I can see the purser shrinking away from her. And all she can think is, the West Indies are ahead. Jamie and the Artemis are behind. She's stuck in the middle with 600 drink-mad English sailors and a hold full of inflamed bowels. Oh, sounds terrible. She's determined she would speak to the captain no matter what he was doing at this very moment. She found him asleep on his desk. She was going to leave and come back, but accidentally knocks a book off the locker she brushed against. Though it wasn't noisy when the book fell, he was startled awake. He about calls her Mrs. Fraser before correcting himself to call her Mrs. Malcolm. She tells him she needs more alcohol and what is happening with the men drinking the purified version and the need for fresh air in the sick bay. And then she pauses because he's not totally awake yet, and he gathers his thoughts and he comes to full wakefulness. Says he will do what he can, that he must go. He will send the purser to her if she would wait here. On his way out, she asks how old he is. Though clearly annoyed, he says 19. She is astonished at this. He's a mere baby. Same age as Brianna, but he's in charge of an English man-of-war, one with the plague aboard. She sees even more now that him taking her was out of complete desperation. She notices his logbook is laying open upon the desk. She sees the name Fraser in it. She secures the door and begins to read, and she goes back to the day she came onto the ship. And he writes of C. Malcolm coming aboard as the surgeon, but not that she is a woman. She reads about the dead that are listed with the initials DD by them. And the day after her arrival on board, all about Tompkins' information and who Jamie is and his crimes. Claire will be returned to the Artemis, but Jamie would be arrested right away once in Jamaica. Claire's mind is reeling. Who is Tompkins, and how does he know so much about Jamie? Who else knows? And they know what her name is, clearly, because the captain almost called her Fraser. So she hears footsteps, and she gets up and unlatches the door. So she hears footsteps, and she gets up to unlatch the door right in time for the purser to come in. And she's telling him what they need, and he says that they can cut their grog rations further, and it's only 2 weeks longer to Jamaica. And Claire doesn't care that the sailors will be upset. She needs the rum, or they may not make it to Jamaica alive. The purser says he will tell them and take care of it. And as he's leaving, she says she saw the captain write DD. What does it mean? It means discharged dead. It's the only way most will ever leave the Royal Navy. So she worked as usual, tending to the sick, overseeing things. And all the while, she's thinking over the puzzle of Tompkins. She only heard his voice, but had never seen him. Of course, if he becomes ill, Claire would meet him. Otherwise, with the ship and the crew being so large, how is she going to find him? So she asks Elias if he knows who he is, and he does, and he explains it to Claire. He came on board being pressed into service in Edinburgh. He complained and put up a fight because he worked for Sir Percival Turner, but there was no written letter of protection from the customs man, so Turner had to go into service. So he was a customs agent. Claire's gears are spinning. Who do you think it is? Elias is clearly exhausted, and she wants him to go to bed, but he insists on doing one more set of sick rounds before going to his cot. And by the time they finished, she was nearly as tired as he was, but she's unable to sleep. Claire was putting the puzzle of Tompkins, customs agent, working for Personal Turner, who turned a blind eye to Jamie's activities altogether. Was there a traitor among the smugglers? Finally tired enough, she went to sleep with the knowing she had to find Tompkins for herself. But she didn't have to wait too long and didn't even have to go looking for him. Serendipity would have Tompkins showing up in her cabin in a couple of days. She was resting in the surgeon's cabin when a knock came. There'd been an accident, and he was escorted in. She knew immediately it was the one-eyed seaman young Ian thought he had killed. He had one blind eye and burn scars. She knew he recognized her as well. She takes inventory of the injury. It's a gory leg wound, but fixable. And she asks what happened. He explains. Claire looked through her medicine box, all the while wondering how to get the info she needed out of him. And then she spies the amputation saw and picks it up. It's 18 inches long with rust-flecked steel, and she places it above his knee, and then she says, "Mr. Tompkins, let us talk frankly." An hour later, he was back in his hammock, stitched and bandaged, shaking in every limb. She felt a bit shaky herself. So what did she find out with her powers of persuasion? He was an agent for Turner, covering a fairly large area of docks and warehouses where he would pick up gossip or catch any evidence of unlawful activity. And with the Scots not liking the English tax laws, it gave him plenty of work and reportings. But anyone of substantial worth would be put to Turner's discretion, meaning he would take bribes. He was ambitious, and he was looking for something spectacular to get recognized for. And when he found out there was a possibility of a major political criminal in his midst, that could do it, a.k.a. Malcolm Roy Fraser. He goes on to explain to Claire that it's difficult to pin sedition on anybody because seditionists, they don't rat on each other. Smuggling is easier to get evidence sometimes, but still, it doesn't matter what you know. If there's no evidence, you can't do anything about it. And we find out that he had no idea who he was looking for until another agent got into it with one of Fraser's men, and voila, it all fell into place. All the names. Who tipped them off? She was suturing him now, and he was pleading for her to stop. And she wasn't really trying to hurt him, but he had a big wound that needed to be sutured. And he says it was an Englishman. And Claire's thinking, there's no Englishman in Jamie's crew. And after the task of suturing him, she gives him brandy to drink. And he's very happy about this, and he relaxes. And after this, he told her the rest of the story. And then he gets to the part of it that talks about the print shop, and she says she knows this part and asks if his burns still hurt. He says they don't now. She learns he was also not a part of the Arbroath ambush, but he, of course, had heard about it. Sir Percival had told Jamie about the ambush in order to make it look like he had nothing to do with it. And the Englishmen who worked with Jamie had told him about the change of location. What Englishmen? As far as we know, they're all Scots, right? And then Claire wants to know about the dead customs agent the night of the Arbroath ambush. And she is shocked to find out the other customs agent killed him to make it look like Jamie did it, because they had no evidence of sedition. They had no evidence of the smuggling. They had to get some evidence, so he was killed. So here's how it all worked out. Well, I'm telling you, missus, just you wait. Tompkins raised a monitory hand. So here's Sir Percival, knowing as he's got a rare case with the man's not only one of the biggest smugglers on the Firth and the author of some of the most first-rate seditious material it's been my privilege to see, but is also a pardoned Jacobite traitor whose name will make the trial a sensation from one end of the kingdom to the other. The only trouble being, he shrugged, as there's no evidence. It began to make a hideous sort of sense as Tompkins explained the plan. The murder of a customs officer killed in pursuit of duty would not only make any smuggler arrested for the crime subject to a capital charge, but was the sort of heinous crime that would cause a major public outcry. The matter-of-fact acceptance that smugglers enjoyed from the populace would not protect them in a matter of such callous villainy. And Claire responds, in her oh-so-Claire fashion, "Your Sir Percival has got the makings of a really first-class son of a bitch." Tompkins nodded meditatively, blinking into his cup. And then he goes on to tell her that nobody's going to really miss the other customs agent. Nobody liked him anyway, and many would have liked to have seen him swing. And at this point, Claire retrieves the brandy bottle. Tompkins is quite drunk, and Claire has him taken back to his hammock because he cannot stand. Not on his own, at least. And she says he is 3 days off duty and he cannot work until she takes the stitches out. And at this, he says, "Old Harry Tompkins always ends up all right, no matter what." And she looks at him and his long nose that's pink-tipped with liquor, at his large transparent ears, and his single sly brown eye. And she asks what year he was born in. 1713, he says. And when she got the chance, she'd have to check with Mr. Willoughby, but she ventures he was born in the year of the rat. So Claire has uncovered some incredibly important information. So is this Englishman that Jamie works with, the one behind all the mishaps and the dangers that Jamie had faced before Claire returned? Who's trying to kill him? And stop and think for a moment. Who among Jamie's crew of men, the smugglers, has an English name? Only one. Can you guess who it is? Who's double-dealing on Jamie and who turned him into Sir Percival and connected all those dots? But Claire is still in the middle of the ocean, 2 weeks away from Jamaica, on a ship with the future governor of Jamaica, sick men. She has a heavy task ahead of her. And I'm thinking, how is she staying in that full dress, in all those layers, and being remotely clean? I don't really care that she's likely immune, but her clothes have to be filthy. She only has one outfit. It's not like there's going to be extra shifts or skirts lying around for her. So it makes me wonder how that's being managed every day. What must Claire's hands look like after repeatedly dipping them into this purified alcohol? She's got to be cracked and bleeding, her hands. I mean, she has to be working 20 hours a day. It's unreasonable to think she's not. And to have all these people under her command and her purview, and she does it so well. Her time in the military really did pay off for her adventures in the 18th century. And what about this governor? Who do you think that might be? I mean, it's likely has to be somebody that we know that we haven't seen in a while. So Claire's only been back for a short time. And now she's been separated from Jamie on a different ship. He has to be going absolutely bonkers without her. I could see him being in very bad mood and not in good company whatsoever. So from here, we have to look at these different storylines. Who turned Jamie in and double-crossed him? Who's trying to kill him? Where's young Ian? Will they find him? Who's the mysterious governor? Will they make it to Jamaica at all? Will Claire be able to find out who started and spread the typhoid? There are many storylines going on that will have to be tied up at some point. I want to thank you for listening, and I appreciate you, and I love your feedback. Please send me comments to adramofOutlander@gmail.com. You can call them into the voicemail number 719-425-9444. You can always leave a comment under the podcast post when it's up. You can find me on the A Dram of Outlander page on Facebook, on Instagram and Twitter under Dram of Outlander. Please join us for the Wednesday night chat. The only time there won't be a Wednesday night chat is if we have a major holiday that week and we're all in preparation, or if I happen to be doing my day job and catching a baby. But normally the Wednesday night chat is on Twitter at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and we use the hashtag ADOO for A Dram of Outlander to participate. And I'm working on doing a Facebook chat as well, and I will let you know when that happens. So if you're not on Twitter, we can do it over there. And how can you show appreciation for the podcast? You can share the podcast. You can tell other people to listen. You can review the podcast on iTunes or the other streaming sites. You can also be a Patreon contributor if you're led to do so, to support the show. And that's at patreon.com/adramofOutlander. And don't forget to tune in to the Outlander Science Club podcast as well. It's generally 10 to 20 minutes of science and medicine topic that either Karen Doherty or I go into detail over about something in the chapters that's in the weekly podcast. And in that case, we say, when in doubt, ask what Claire would do. And I hope that you have an absolutely wonderful week. And thank you for listening. And until next time, Slàinte mhath.